Hello, and welcome to the Emerging Consciousness Global Online Festival, a kaleidoscope of voices and perspectives on awakening. Here we are gathering with leading transformative coaches, visionary artists, cultural creatives, an eclectic mix of wisdom keepers, blended with colorful new voices to help us to liberate minds and supercharge consciousness. So thank you so much for being part of this transpersonal movement so that we can co-create a more peaceful and evolved world. My name is Tami Mensh. I'm a transformative life and spiritual business coach, founder of the Kaleidoscope Lounge and Coaching, and creator and host of this event. And throughout this event, we've been looking at consciousness through different lenses. The mystery, the unseen, the poetic, through nature, through creativity. And today we're going to bring in the lens of neuroscience. Wah, wah.
The rest of it sounds cooler, frankly.
I am excited to introduce Betz, the co-founder of Be Above Leadership, an international speaker and trainer on the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and human transformation. And in addition to coaching, Anne is also a published poet, using her understanding of the brain and consciousness to bring life to the wonders of the human soul. And I love that combination. You sold me on that, and I don't need the neuroscience. Well, we do need the neuroscience.
Well, that's sort of a, it's an keep going, but it's kind of that interesting question is why do we need it? Like, what is that about? I think it's a great question, frankly.
Okay, good. Let's start with that. Let's see what emerges. Right?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so the topic of this session is the neuroscience of consciousness.
It's a pretty bold topic, I have to say. Let me just say one thing about that. This kind of question about what is consciousness, they call it in philosophy, they call it the big question of philosophy. Philosophers can't agree on it. Neuroscientists can't agree on it. Nobody can really agree on what, they can't even agree on whether we are conscious or whether we're just like brains in a vat, much less, the way that we look at consciousness in my organization, which is different levels of consciousness, which harkens back to work by David Hawkins and Ken Wilber and Margaret Wheatley, even people like that. So, it's kind of this pretty bold thing to say, I'm going to tell you the neuroscience of consciousness. And yet it really is my big project in life and what I'm trying to figure out. And so back to that sort of like, do we even need the neuroscience? Here is what I have seen is that there's a whole group of people who don't need it because you're already there. You don't need to be rationally convinced that life works better when you come from your heart, right? Like, you don't need me to draw you a map about that. Or that it's, that you're going to have more flow and ease in life at different levels of consciousness. You don't need that. However, it sort of goes to why I started connecting neuroscience to consciousness is that the people who most need to hear these things, they need a bridge, right? They're not going to just believe it because it feels intuitively true because they're disconnected from their intuition or they never had a chance to develop it. Or, they're trained in a model that says, unless you can do A plus B plus C plus D, forget it, it's not real. And so they, the reason I got into this is not because I needed it. It's because some of the people around me were putting up a block that neuroscience was the way through, really. Does that make sense?
To prove that all of this stuff that we intuitively feel and sense into is scientifically,
Right. There's some like reality around that. I call it kind of a is it okay to swear a little bit? Is that all right?
Please do.
Kind of like by nature a bit of a badass. And so people are like, oh, you're not like, what is this neuroscience thing? I'm like, I call it a neuroscience smackdown. Boom. Oh, I don't think intuition is really real. I think we should be able to, use just our left brain, for example, for all of our decisions. I'm like, okay, fine. Let me just tell you a little something here. Boom. If you're going to be all logical and rational, let's really be logical and rational, but let's expand your thinking. And if you don't want to listen to what I'm telling you about neuroscience, then you need to give up this view that you have that you're so logical.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's why I have a lot of fun with it. Boom.
So you got into this because you were like, I know this makes sense, and I want to show people in a rational way that it does.
And some of it was, and I'm sure, Tami, those. I like to say, life sends us two kinds of blessings, and one comes in a beautiful package and it's lovely. And those are like the dear friends of your heart that help you understand things, and it's wonderful. And then you get the blessings that are like wrapped in dirty newspaper that the fish was in. It's like, oh my God. So part of this was I was married actually to not a bad guy, but he was a lawyer. We're no longer together. And he was really the quintessential, he and, our sort of friend group who were all like Yale and Harvard and, lawyers. And I went to like a state university, and they all like, I couldn't have the conversation that I wanted to have with them because I didn't have an angle in. And I felt like, and here's why it mattered, because I saw them suffering. All of their rational lawyer, A plus B, and, argue someone into a corner and all of that stuff was actually making them miserable and sick. And I felt like consciousness, human development, understanding the heart, all of that was a way forward, but they would not have that conversation with me. And I think that frustration was one of those gifts that made me say, I can't just keep preaching to the choir. I love talking to the choir. We have a great time. We can go spinning off into, amazing worlds. But the people that really do need this, we need bridges. They need a bridge. So I was already doing the consciousness stuff. And, the other thing that I will say is at the time, we had a small but very loyal band, but it wasn't expanding very much from a business sense. It's like the same people every time who wanted to have these conversations. And, by bringing in neuroscience, I think what it also did, even for the people who already did believe this, it gave them a reason to write the check. It gave the part of their brain that was programmed for practicality. It gave them this permission to be like, oh, well, that's legit. And then, so we like to say, so we bring them in with neuroscience, but we keep them with consciousness in our work.
Mm-hmm.
And fall in love with consciousness. And so it's a little bit of a, it gives them that doorway in. But sometimes our own sort of Protestant work ethic, or, insert whatever you want, keeps us from doing the yummy, meaningful, amazing, transformative things we want to do because we can't figure out how that's going to make us more money, unfortunately.
So I know this is another big question, but you seem ready for it.
I'll do my best.
What have you learned from consciousness that that we can use? What are those key things that could help us with this to grow in this way?
It's a really good question. Okay, you're talking about all of this, so what about it? Well, in terms of being able to map this in terms of neuroscience, is that where I should go now?
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the main things that we have seen that feels like I keep finding more and more validation. So first of all, nobody is researching that I know of. I mean, maybe there are people that are tapping into this a little bit, but nobody's specifically doing like brain scans looking for different levels of consciousness. You know, the meditation research might be the closest. So what I have to do is I have to take what's out there in the research, first of all, assess whether it's good, well done research or not, and then say, okay, how does this work with what we know about consciousness or coaching? And one of the things that has come again and again is actually, and it's the biggest uh, piece of the puzzle, and the word that I love is integration.
Mm.
So what seems to be happening at higher levels of effectiveness, higher levels of consciousness, what I believe we would see, and I can give you an example of where this maps, but I believe what we would see is a brain that is more integrated. And we use a very specific definition of integration, and it comes from one of our original teachers, a man named Dr. Dan Siegel, who's lovely. I mean, maybe know of him or heard of him. He's a great guy to follow and great guy to, listen to. He's fascinating. One of the great minds of our time, I think. His definition is integration is the linking differentiated elements. So we're not seeing just an integrated brain isn't just a big mush, right? It's a brain where the operator, the person, has a sense of the strengths and weaknesses of sort of separate areas or separate systems, even the system of the body as it connects to the brain. They're aware with that. They can discern when the body's sending a message. They can discern when maybe the right hemisphere is a little more activated. So there's a discernment, differentiation. They understand this. They can discern when maybe their brain has gotten flooded with stress chemicals. There's a discernment. So, oh my gosh, I am not at my best right now. I probably should not send that email because I will be a jerk if I do, right? There's that discernment. And so the discernment is first, and then we link. So it's not an argument that says it's just about what your body has to say. And it's not an argument that says it's just about what you are cognitively processing. It's not an argument that says, the left brain should be in charge of this or the right brain or any part. It's basically being able to hold the separate and the together and say, for example, I'll do left and right hemisphere. Left hemisphere tends to discern the particles in the world. Right hemisphere more attuned to the whole, to the kind of gestalt of things. And there are things that come with that. Judgment maybe a little more on the left, openness a little more on the right. We get into some challenge around this, but they see the world differently. They process information slightly differently. So I want this open view of the world, but I also want to be able to narrow things down. So I don't want to vote, oh, we should just all be open. Well, what happens, I had a lovely client out here, very an artist, very, very open, huge strengths in openness and the aspect of creativity, not all creativity, but the aspect of creativity that comes from openness. The problem is if you can never narrow down, she was having trouble even making money because she didn't have the clarity around what she should charge for her paintings. And I'm not kidding you. So we don't want to say, oh, an artist should be all of this. No, what you want is to be in this dance. Oh, I actually have an art teacher who calls it, oh my gosh, what's the first word? But she calls it it's like detail and structure release. We have to have structure and release. And then in my business, I have done a lot of work with companies, and they want to argue for all the details and all of this. The problem is people lose motivation because they forget the why. They get too narrowed down. It becomes very dead. And that's, the way a lot of people feel in the business world, because there's not an integration with, yes, it's important. You should know I know how to do spreadsheets. I love doing spreadsheets. I don't live in a spreadsheet, right? The spreadsheets are for the sake of, so I can have this wonderful life. But this thing of saying you need to do both, and you need to have this awareness of, is one pulling too hard right now, pulling me to a point where I'm not effective because I'm in chaos, because I can't figure anything out, or I'm in rigidity because I'm so focused on the details. So I think an integrated brain is really in this dance with itself, because you've differentiated. You can see, oh, I'm getting a little rigid. I better calibrate back. So anyway, that was a long thing of saying, but tell me what that's.
A lot's happening for me right now.
Tell me.
It's, I'm feeling like, you're saying the sense of pushing and pulling, and there's this gap, in the middle. So we're like, emerging consciousness is like navigating this gap and pulling in both so that we can be a more integrated whole. Is that?
And absolutely. And anytime I hear anyone arguing for one thing, arguing for whatever it is, if it's arguing for, the body knows everything. I think the body knows a whole lot, and actually probably more than the brain, but I do not believe any disintegrated argument is an argument that is going to put us at the higher levels of consciousness. It's never one thing. No matter what you argue for, it's never going to be that one. It's the yes and. I come back to that again and again.
So in this, thinking about emerging and growing and elevating our consciousness, or evolving it, or whatever words, we want to use, we expand, right? And so we're expanding, and then we have to integrate all over again because we've expanded the space. My word of the year, is expansion. And your word of the year is expansion?
No, I can't remember the word. No, I'm trying to remember what it is. Right now is trauma, because I'm fascinated by trauma. But anyway, that's not a very empowering word of the year, except,
an important word.
One of the yes ands that I think sometimes gets missed in the spiritual world, that one of the things that I think is a necessary emergent conversation, and I am hearing some people pay more attention to this, but there's a little bit of this view that if you're not happy and positive, you're not enlightened. And, for me, one of the biggest red flags is if I meet someone, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is a great place, but I got to tell you, there's some characters out here. I'm probably one of them, and so you hear a lot of the, like a lot of people kind of talk about their spiritual credentials kind of a lot. And anytime I hear anyone say anything to me like, well, I just choose to be positive, and I'm just really, I don't have any time for negative people. And, I'm just all about positivity. All of that. I think, okay, I'm probably not going to be your friend. That sounds really mean, but it's a red flag for me, because what it is it's saying, I can't include this. Mm-hmm. I'm choosing to either suppress or ignore. And yet then there are the people, and, there are sort of people in my circles who are very, very political, and it feels like they can't see the positive at all sometimes, right?
They're not going to be your friends either.
We're probably not going to be super close, because that's again like life is terrible. It's, global warming and everything is awful. And, doesn't matter that we had a new election in the US. It's like, it's this either things suck
Mhm.
or they're just everything is wonderful. And I think an advanced spiritual understanding to me is the ability to include. And, we have a mutual friend, and one of the things that I absolutely love about this very dear friend that I have out here, she's absolutely unafraid to say she's having a bad day, right?
Mhm.
And she
Mhm.
doesn't feel like she always has to be like, yes, but, you know, everything's, magical when it's not, or it doesn't feel that way. And yet, she doesn't live in this world of no possibility.
Right.
So it's a paradox. And if we can't, I think the inability to be with paradox to me is a lower level of thinking. And I feel really bad even saying that because that sounds really judgy. But it's like if you can't be with things are perfect and they're not, and dance in that conversation, you're going to be limited in your spiritual growth.
Right. It's just too black and white, and we need to be in all the forms of gray and color in between for the complexity and for to see more possibility.
Yeah, and I think too, I'm reminded of, I'm a big David Hawkins fan. I mean, it's one of my early 20 years ago, encountered his work, and we've really taken a lot of his work and used that to provide a scaffolding for what we're looking at, how we're looking to fit neuroscience onto consciousness. We go back to David Hawkins, and I remember something that I read 20 years ago where he basically said, if you are in a lower state of consciousness, the only way out is through.
Mhm.
You just be present to it. You want to increase your ability to be present to whatever is occurring physiologically. And that is how we get told, that is the genesis of emotion is the physiological. And so he really taught me years ago not to try to ignore my anxiety or frustration, but to sit with it, which is, I think, what, good meditators learn how to do as well. Sit with it, integrate it, let it inform me, let it disperse, don't act out of it.
Right. Right. So what are some of the what are some of the other things that we know about consciousness that we can that's useful from neuroscience?
Yeah, I think that, the the piece about it is what we are continually, if we can go for more integration rather than more positivity, if we can go for more presence to what we're experiencing without then making that someone else's problem, but taking the time to simply be present and notice, um, sometimes without even labeling, but just being, connecting with that. All of those things feel like they have a real impact in consciousness, in effectiveness in every area of life. It really, the way that you were describing sort of expansion, one of the ways that I sort of think about consciousness and what I'm sort of personally going for, I've got to hopefully have a few years left that I can keep doing this, is I think of a person sort of standing in a gyroscope, being able to sort of stand at the center of life and their own brain and their own past and their history and their trauma. And that the highest levels of consciousness, real transcendence, real, we might say, enlightenment, feels like at least what we can find in, as we've been, in this 20-year project of research and teaching around this, that level of consciousness, first of all, is very difficult to achieve as a steady state in this world, because so many things come and, kind of buffet you in the gyroscope. But that enlightenment is the emergent property of a well-integrated system. And this is the piece where I don't think we know quite as much, is that, and I did a deep dive into looking at some of the research on mindfulness last year. And what we came to is that mindfulness is one of the many things it's going to do. But as it relates to consciousness, what's critical is the ability to be an observer. And for me, that is also integration. I can both have a sensation and observe the sensation. I can differentiate it and I can link it into my consciousness. I can be, the observer mind. There are other ways to develop that, but any form of mindfulness, that's the piece that feels the most related to real transcendence or enlightenment. Because if you can't observe, you will be run by whatever it is. And you'll be saying things and doing things that are not particularly enlightened or effective, right? Because they're just happening.
Autopilot kind of behavior.
Right, autopilot, we don't talk anymore about amygdala hijack, but it's kind of a metaphor. It's not literally true that your amygdala takes over, but there is this idea like when you get really, really stressed, there is a chemical response in the brain, and it can be harder to regulate your actions. And so even if you are the most dedicated spiritual seeker, add enough stress to your brain, it can be very difficult to modulate that. But the stronger your networks are around observation, the easier it will be, right? But there is something about, I say there's a wonderful phrase as a philosophy major in philosophy, necessary but not sufficient. So all of this integration, all of this meditation, all of this spiritual practice necessary to higher levels of consciousness, but may not actually be sufficient, because there's a point at which you can't do exalted states of consciousness, right? You can't do it. It can be like, okay, let's hold hands now and just think of love, right? That feels to me like a lower
Try
level.
really hard right now, right?
I'm just going to really be right now.
Right.
But all of these things, because of the state it puts your brain in, feel like it's like becoming, I think, and I'm not the only one, this is not original, so I don't want to sign up for that. Oh, Anne thought of that, no. I probably read it somewhere. But what makes sense to me is consciousness is not, in fact, I did read a book one time where they talked about the difference between, is consciousness a CD player? Are we CD players? Or are we radios? And I sign up for that. We're not a closed system. We're a radio. So when we tune our own being with balancing different parts of our body, brain, different hemispheres, different aspects of the brain, and get into this very steady gyroscope, we become a really powerful radio receiver. And then we can receive, should we choose to tune our attention there, we can receive higher levels of consciousness that are actually outside of us. That's how I hold it. And also diet, exercise, sleep, all of those things impacts how good a radio I am. But what the radio is playing, I don't think comes from here. I think it comes from the universe.
Yeah.
So, tune your radio.
Right.
Be a radio receiver.
Right. I feel that. I get that the frequencies and the making sure the messages and going inflow and outflow and so what do we, based on all of your your research, all that you've learned, what's still like confounding you? Like what do we not know from all of this science?
Well, what is, I think, the most interesting place to look right now, and what is that people like the Institute of Noetic Sciences and the Institute for the Study of Etheric Energy, ICEM, and Etheric Energy and Energy Medicine, people like that who are a Heart Math Institute, who are really looking to, this is science beyond this system, right? This is science that is looking at how we have a universal system that we're part of. And what neuroscience does is it's going to look at what's within right here. And the most progressive neuroscience is going to include the body, but not even everybody does that. So I'm curious about the, how we are energetically connected. What's the collective consciousness? What is the relationship between quantum mechanics and our day-to-day life? And there's a lot there that, like there's stuff that I can tell you in neuroscience that's pretty well validated, lots and lots of studies, things like, well, anyway, there's like stuff that's really well validated. Like if you do not get enough sleep, your brain is full of trash basically that did not have a chance to get cleared out, and it's hard to focus. And that's very, very well validated. That'll mess up your radio receiver, right? It's not a, sorry, those of you who don't like to sleep, that's just pretty clear. But when we look at things like, can I manifest a parking spot? Right? Can I manifest anything, or is it delusional? Neuroscientists would say it's simply what you are choosing to, the information, that people who say they manifest parking spots don't actually get any more parking spots. They just remember the ones they got.
Do they notice the ones that they weren't noticing, or?
It's all about cognitive bias. It's also can have to do with that when you expect to see a parking spot, you see what you expect to see. So there's that. But, I've been knocking around this spiritual world I'm 57, and I have been playing to some degree in it since I was 18 years old. No kidding. When I first took my first personal growth workshop. So, we're looking at 40 years, and I got to tell you, I have seen enough weird stuff that I can't say it's all just cognitive bias. I have noticed for me that as I have worked very, very, in a very focused way to process my fear around money and security, like worked on that like for years, like like everything I could do, every tool I could do, every coaching I had, that what I've noticed is I have very little fear about money. And I also have a lot of flow around money. I have no, and you could just say, well, Anne, in that same time, you were also becoming better known and more successful, except I have these weird things happen. I'll give you just an example. I had a bark beetle infestation. I have 4 acres in Santa Fe, and I had like 100 trees that died all of a sudden, and they had to come out. And I was not in a point where I really felt like I had just an extra $3,000 hanging around to get rid of my trees, but I had to do it. It was going to, affect my neighbors' trees. It was absolutely the right thing to do. So I just basically said, okay, send me the money. That wasn't in my budget. I need this money to do this thing. And I got a check from when I leased my car 2 years ago, that I had overpaid 2 years ago. And like, it was insane. And it was like for $2,800. So it was pretty much what I needed for the trees. So I have too many examples, both for me and other people, to say that that's just, well, Anne, you have no money issues now because you come more successful. I think I don't have money issues because I'm not afraid of scarcity anymore. Pretty much.
What do you think happened in there? What do you think happened?
It might not be in here. Right?
Right.
But it tuned my radio receiver. So on a very practical way, when we're afraid of anything, and fear is just a useful, common human thing. And so when we talk about consciousness, and we have a model, the 7 levels of effectiveness, so that people in business don't think we're weird. effectiveness, but it's really what was I going to say? But so when we teach it, we don't teach it as a good, bad. It's just that there are levels that when you are stuck in them, create a less effective radio, both brain state, both on a practical level in terms of the kind of actions you're taking from, hopelessness, fear, and frustration are three, what we call below the line levels. So if I'm in fear, I may be acting in ways that are less effective, but I'm also, my radio receiver is, there's some things not connecting in there. And because literally what's happening is my body and my brain are getting an influx of chemicals that are making it hard to think. But I think they're also blocking my connection to, the support of the universe. So when I worked to really be present to that fear, really process that fear, really look at where it came from and love myself and forgive myself and all of that, I'm not blocked from the support of the universe. Also, when I was living in fear, that's what I was expecting, is that money was going to be scarce, right? So that's what I'm tuned for. That's the station my radio is tuned to. Now I'm tuned to, okay, just send me the money.
You were freezing just a little
I
bit
froze
there.
for a minute.
Yeah. But we got the send me the money part.
So I think it's happening on a couple of levels. I don't think that. And am I freezing again?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Hopefully this will fingers crossed. Please stay. I haven't mastered that yet.
Let's tune the radio to this.
Tune the, please stay stable. So I think it's yes and. Consciousness isn't separate from this system, but it's also not limited to this system. We're both. We're the French theologian Teilhard de Chardin said, we are spiritual. I lost again. Hold on one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why it's going unstable. Are you able to edit?
I can edit it. Yeah.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to switch to the other network and see if that gives me a little bit better. And especially if you can edit. Oh, where is that? There we go. Different connect. Okay, I'm going to try this connection and.
Okay. All right. So you were.
I was saying,
quote.
Yeah, I can kind of rewind a little bit. So the French feel, we're not limited. It's not the question that consciousness is separate from here, but neither is it that it is totally contained here. It's again, this integration, it's both. And I love the quote, many people know this, the French theologian Teilhard de Chardin, he said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so part of that human experience is that when we're flooded with stress chemicals, or when we're not aware of the multiplicity of the options for who we are in terms of how our brains process, that then our human experience can't contribute as much to, higher levels of consciousness.
Yes, we had a little bit of technical difficulty with Anne, so we turned the cameras off and we'll be able to just continue our conversation for a few more minutes. So hang in there with us.
Thanks, Tami. One of the things that I was saying is that we the whole thing about consciousness is it's not like everything else, it's not an either or. It doesn't exist within the human system, but it doesn't just exist outside of us. I think it's the dance between this radio receiver as well as, what it is receiving. So I love the quote, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, because the human experience does matter. It's just we're not limited to that.
Right, right, right. Well put. And so I'd like to just change gears just for a little bit, because I'm a coach and you're a coach, and I want to kind of bring this into the field of coaching a little bit. I was introduced to your work through a Coaches Rising podcast, and I really loved your talk about how coaching, what's the responsibility of coaching to consciousness and to emerging consciousness. I know that a lot of times, coaches, the client is the expert, and we stay out of the way. And do you think what do you think the role is here, or the opportunity for coaches to help to emerge consciousness?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, because I think we have such power, but what are we really up to? For the sake of what? Is it just to help people have more of what is not really fulfilling them? But here's where it gets sticky. This is where it's different than other things, is that we work with the language of purpose and fulfillment and values, and we're helping people really look at what is this meaningful life. In many ways, what I believe coaching does is, where it is the distinction between coaching and psychology is coaching is more applied philosophy. What is meaning? What matters? And so if that's what we're up to, what we, sort of what feels embedded in that to me is that we're up to a life of higher consciousness, where the things of life, the success of life starts looking a little different. So, one of the things we say in coaching is it's always about the client's agenda. And I sort of come to a view where maybe in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. There's a little paradox there, because I do have an agenda for my clients. My agenda is that they develop in consciousness, because if they do that, everything else shifts. And, for example, what hopefully shifts is this view of I have to do more, be more, try harder, get more, more money, more stuff, more titles, all of that. Hopefully, if we're really working on meaning and purpose and who are they, what starts to shift in there is they start realizing they're enough. And I'm no longer helping them unless it is their joy, to do the big thing, and it is their fulfillment of who they are, but it's not about proving anything. So, my agenda is to get people to the place where they're fulfilled, not where they have more. And sometimes that looks like having less.
Right, right. And I love this this way of coaching, and I feel really honored to be in service in this way, in this field, to be trusted, to be to help people open
Yeah.
with this. I really do.
I love that you say be of service. I believe, and this again is not original, but I believe there's a fundamental thing that happens in human development, that is this place, and different people have different language for us, but I call it the shift when someone goes from being externally defined to internally defined. And that is a major, you will not develop in consciousness until you cross that hurdle. And sometimes that happens with a dark night of the soul, where everything that was defining you externally gets taken away so that you can actually realize what matters. But you've got to be able to cross that threshold where it comes back to not what does the world think, but what do I think? It's so fundamental, and it is so hard for many people. And I think that is one of the critical things we need to do as coaches is, and then they can have whatever they want. I'm not against, I'm not against having nice stuff, but not because you have to.
Why do you want it? What is it? What is the purpose
Are
for
you
you?
trying to prove something? Right.
Right, right. It's amazing. Why do you think coaching works so well for people?
Well, from a neuroscience perspective, there's so much of what we do in coaching that helps with what I was talking about at the beginning, this idea of differentiation and linkage.
Mhm.
It really, so much of it comes back there where we look, where we help people discern and understand, who am I? And I think about early on, one of the very first things my coach ever did with me 20 years ago is asked me, went through a process of what are my values, and not just at a check it off the box, but like, if you have a value of integrity, what does that mean to you? Right. And so I have this list of values. And then the question is, okay, we've identified maybe 10 or 12 critical values. Good, that's a differentiation. Now, how are you going to start bringing more and more of them into your decision making, and more of them into your life? And where are you not honoring your value of integrity, and what gets in the way? Oh my God. So there's this, first figure out what this is, and then figure out how you do it in your life. Differentiation and linkage. And I think, and there's so many different things we do like that. That's just one very classic example to me. And why does that work? Because I am living a life where I don't choose between my values, but I'm in this paradox. I'm in this dynamic tension of saying, oh my God, how do I honor honesty and kindness? When it feels like, in order to have this relationship, I need to choose. If I have the relationship, I have to choose being kind. If I, have the relationship with myself, I have to choose being honest. Oh, there's a dynamic tension there that's going to put me in a higher level of awareness if I can resolve that tension. And the coaching, that's one of the classic things we do, right?
Mhm.
I think we're always sort of trying to resolve dynamic tensions. The resolution of a dynamic tension is integration, and you're walking in the world, and I don't have to choose between being kind and being honest, but I've figured out how to do both.
Right. And then we
And
are.
that's a force to be reckoned with. When you have somebody like that, that's a force to be reckoned with. And not in a bad way, but like as a you know, as a whole human, like, being that you want to be with, work with, learn from, etc.
Empowered and powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So
thank you. Yes, yes. This feels like a good place to bring it to a close. Lot of juicy goodness in here, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell. We're gonna on the speaker page. We're gonna have all of the different links and information, how to find you, and if there's anything you want to add or share with people on how to connect with you, or about the free gift that you're offering. Please tell them. Yeah, share it now.
I will. And thank you for your patience with my technology issues. I clearly need to master that area of life.
No problem.
Um,
We're all dealing with that. So.
um, So yes, our free gift is, if you're interested, I mentioned our levels of effectiveness. There are also levels of consciousness, and our free gift is a little wallet card, so you can have a little handy thing. We've sent those all over the world. We've used this with thousands of people over about 20 years, and so we'd love to have you kind of take a look at that. And then if you're a coach and you're fascinated by this intersection between neuroscience, consciousness, and how coaching fits in, we do a year-long program where we go pretty deep into all of it. And, just check out our webpage. It's on there under neuroscience programs. And we have a number of like free preview calls that you can come and get your questions answered.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. I really, really enjoyed this conversation and going deeper with you. And I hope we have the opportunity to continue talking.
I would love that. I had a great time. Thank you. Thank you for your great questions and just, this wonderful summit. Really wonderful to be part of this great conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.